So as Carly mentioned, my name is Gabriele Contessa, and I'm an associate professor in the philosophy department here at Carleton. This is my email address in case anything in the talk piques your interest and you want to shoot me an email. That's the best way to contact me. So that's my email address. Um, so the catchy title for this talk is Fake News, Fat Diets, and Flat Earthers. But really, the secret plan here is to introduce you to really very active corner of philosophy that is called social epistemology. And what I plan to do today is to give you kind of a whirlwind through tour of the landscape, because it's a very active field, and because so much is happening really in the last just in the last decade or so in this field. I'm just gonna kind of give you a idea of what is going on, but we're not going to get into any depth into any of these. But if any, I say it as if any of these interests you, or if you want to ask questions at the end of the presentation, you're welcome to, and I can get a bit more in depth on some of these ideas that we're going to be discussing. So what I want to start with, though, is something more traditional. Because to understand what social epistemology is, you got to understand what traditional epistemology is. A lot of what goes by the name of epistemology today in philosophy, it's still done kind of in this, what I call the individualistic tradition. Now, first of all, epistemology is the study of knowledge. It's kind of the fancy term philosophers use to talk about the study of knowledge. Episteme is basically the Greek word for knowledge, and you have that ology suffix to actually say the study of, and so they get the name epistemology. Now, traditional epistemology, modern epistemology really, is usually dated back to René Descartes, who you see actually pictured here, who was a early modern philosopher, French philosopher. You probably heard of him, and is considered kind of not only kind of the essentially the great great grandfather, I guess, of modern philosophy, but also the great 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 grandfather of modern epistemology, because as some people say, Descartes turned epistemology in the first philosophy, in the philosophy, the first subject essentially that you should be studying if you're doing philosophy. The basic idea is, and Descartes decided to do this in kind of an interesting way. So his book is one of his most famous books, is the Meditations on First Philosophy. Again, this is the idea of first philosophy. And it's a book that it's partly a work of epistemology. It starts with epistemology, and Descartes carries it out in this way that I call individualistic, in a very clear way. What does Descartes do? Essentially, he locks himself up in a room, and he decides one day that he's going to start to go through all of his beliefs and try to figure out which ones are true and which ones might be false. Now, I'm not going to tell you how the story ends, because first of all, it would be a spoiler for your first epistemology course if you decide to take one. And second, because it's not really the focus of what we're interested in today. What I want you to notice about this is the idea that that knowledge is something that you can gain by yourself. Like, you can sit in a room and think about stuff really hard. Descartes was what we call a rationalist. So he's somebody who believed that very much in the power of reason when it comes to gaining knowledge. But here I'm giving a more broad definition of what traditional individualistic epistemology is. And I define it with the idea that most of our beliefs come from reasoning and or observation, where observation is more closely related to the school of philosophy that we call empiricism. So there's if you take an intro to philosophy class, or if you take a intro to epistemology, there's going to be a lot of talk, or of course, in early modern philosophy, there's going to be a lot of talk about rationalists and empiricists. But what both rationalists and empiricists seem to agree with was that knowledge is something that we gain by ourselves. We go around the world and we learn stuff. Now, social epistemologists really question this. And this is really a recent trend. You can find some precursors, some people that sort of anticipated these ideas, and to some extent Descartes and other historical epistemologists, traditional epistemologists, would agree with part of what social epistemologists say. But the social epistemologists really put at the center of epistemology this idea that knowledge is something we gain collectively. It's something that we do socially. And so most of our beliefs, according to social epistemologists, do not come from observation or reasoning. I mean, of course, there are some, like, if I want to know what color is the coffee mug that I have, I look at it. I'm not going to ask somebody to tell me. I can directly look at it. But if you think of other pieces of knowledge, other things you think you know, you'll quickly realize that they are not things that you've learned by yourself. So just for a couple of minutes, just start thinking about the questions that I have here, right? These are questions you probably know the answer of. I'm assuming you're not going to know the answer to most of them, or you think you know the answer to most of them. Things like, where were you born? Who's the Prime Minister of Canada? Is Earth a flat disk? How do you say sorry in French? Does wearing a mask help prevent the spread of COVID-19? Is gluten bad for you? Those are all questions you might think you know the answer to, but more than thinking about the answer, actually, I want to think of how do you think you've arrived at the answer? And I think if you start thinking about that, you're going to realize that for most of these questions, you didn't find out you answered yourself. You relied on some source that you trust, presumably, that gave you the answer. So when it comes to where were you born, well, it's probably your parents, or you're at a birth certificate that says the date you were born in. When it comes to the Prime Minister of Canada, again, it could be from, you learn it from school, from other people, from the news. Is Earth a flat disk? You probably have heard that it's not, if you've taken any science. In fact, you probably don't even need to have taken science. You probably taught in school that Earth is actually a sphere, and yet, as the title of this mini lecture reminds you, there is now a small minority of people that want to go back to the idea that it was a flat disk. And so on. So if you think about all of these questions, in fact, most of the stuff it's pretty clear that you've come to know it, if you know it at all, because somebody told you, someone you trust, more specifically, has given you that bit of information. Sometimes you might not even remember where you first got that bit of information. Sometimes you just, sort of figure it out as you go along. But the source of knowledge, though, is from kind of this broader community of which you're part. And so for social epistemologies, knowledge is really a social activity. It's something that we engage in together. But why do we do that? I think there is really probably one main reason, and that has to do with our limited resources. We only have this much time in our life, and we only have these many resources. And so if you were to try to figure out everything by yourself, like Descartes did, well, you would, as Descartes, had to take some time off, I guess, whatever his activities were at the time, to actually try to figure out everything from the start. But that seemed to be a very kind of wasteful way of going about things, even if it were possible. And to be honest, given the extent and the breadth of our knowledge these days, especially our scientific knowledge, none of us could actually practically ever do it. But even if we could, it would be inefficient because, as the saying goes, we would be rediscovering the wheel, right? It's something that we don't need to do by ourselves because somebody else is doing it for us. And so this is an idea that epistemology sometimes discuss in terms of the division of epistemic labor. The notion of the division of epistemic labor is sort of similar to the general notion of the division of labor, which is the idea that in society we kind of divided tasks so that people can specialize in a certain task and get better at that and carry out those tasks more efficiently because of that reason. But that makes everybody else more efficient because it frees up some time for people to carry other tasks at which they are better. The idea is that even our epistemic society kind of works in a similar way. We don't need to all find out by ourselves, first person, what the world is like or what's going on. There is people that can be tasked with specific tasks, like, for example, journalists go and find out what's happening, in Parliament Hill. So you don't have to, follow each and every one of the prime minister's press conferences or their question time and so on. And historians go and find out what happened in the distant past. And scientists, astrophysicists, for example, find out how stars are born. Stars, literal stars, no, the proverbial stars, Lady Gaga stars. So the idea is that this division of epistemic labor generates a certain level of efficiency, but at the same time, this is kind of the advantages of the situation, and though this does have some disadvantages as well. So one way to think of this is to think of yourself as embedded in what social epistemologists call an epistemic network, right? So an epistemic network is sort of a social structure of which you are part. It's an informal social structure of which you're part, and you can. It depends on who is part of your epistemic network. Really depends on a number of things, but you can sort of, to give kind of a quick idea of what it could be, what it could mean for someone to be, or someone or something really to be part of your epistemic network. You should be thinking about the people and institutions that you trust, and here is crucial that you're thinking of trust in an epistemic sense. And what I mean is this. Let me try to explain what I mean by to trust someone epistemically. So usually when we're thinking about trusting people, we think of two things. Are they willing to do what we expect them to do? And are they able to do what we're expecting them to do? And so epistemic trust has to do with what one is able to do. And in this case, it's probably give you an answer to certain questions you might have. So just think of the very helpful uncle who likes to tinker with cars, but actually is a really bad mechanic, or a really good mechanic that has no actual intention of actually helping you with your car unless you pay them. So one of them is somebody you would trust in the sense that that they would be really happy to help you, so they're willing to help you. You can trust them practically, I guess, but you don't have epistemic trust in them because your uncle does not really know actually much about the car as much as they thinks that he does. While the mechanic, while you would not necessarily think that they're willing to help you, at least for free, you can trust them epistemically because they know actually how a car works. And so this is what I mean by trust epistemically, is that it's somebody you can trust at the level of ability to answer certain questions or direct you in certain ways about your the items of knowledge you'd like to acquire. So who is part of your epistemic network? Well, it really depends on who you are. But sometimes for some people, some of their family members, some of their friends, some people trust their doctor, for example. They trust them to, they trust their doctor to diagnose the disease. They go to the doctor with certain symptoms, and they trust when the doctor says, "Oh yeah, this is you just have a bad cold," or they give you some more worrisome diagnosis, and you get really worried. Some people trust the prime minister. Some people trust, the leader of the loyal opposition. Some people trust CBC News. Other people trust only other sources of news or non-mainstream sources of news, and so on. Unfortunately, some people also trust random strangers on the internet, and that's a source of a lot of the problems we're going to encounter along the way. And in fact, one of the first things that we're going to talk about is kind of a consequence of being in part of an epistemic network, is that the network also works as what social epistemologists call an epistemic bubble. An epistemic bubble is something that filters out certain information and or misinformation. So it's something that some pieces of information and or misinformation get through, but others do not. And this is really important for a number of reasons. And I'm going to just give you some idea of why that should be the case. Something that has been discussed quite a bit recently, and this is one of the reasons why I guess social epistemology has had really has attracted a lot of interest in the last 10 years or so. It's because many of the social and political issues we seem to be facing seem to have a clear epistemic dimension to them. And one of them is an issue that has been discussed much, especially in the United States and in Europe, where many countries are witnessing an increased polarization. This actually, this picture you see here, it's actually a graph of retweets of tweets by members of by people that lean towards the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So the blue dots are Twitter accounts that are related to people that are leaning towards Democrats, and the red is people that lean Republican. And you can sort of see how there is very few connections. There is some of the, it looks like, kind of a little purple waves. Those are the retweets between the two groups. There are very few, but compared to the really big kind of clouds that you can see there, like in much darker clouds that show you how much more intense retweeting there is. Why is this a problem? Well, it's because some people have been starting to talk about the idea of a post-truth era, the idea that if you are so epistemically polarized, polarization can take many forms, but one form that is particularly interesting to social epistemologists, of course, is what we call epistemic polarization, and that's really the polarization of beliefs. And so when you have two groups that are so heavily polarized, they might not even find kind of common ground to agree on. And one of the classic examples of these was the famous debate that was around Donald Trump inauguration about the size of the crowd at his inauguration. And Trump boasting that it was one of the most crowded inaugurations in presidential history, while the other side denying that it was so. It was a debate that was not eventually settled because the level of polarization and probably the existence of what we've called epistemic bubbles really made, for example, refutations of Trump's views on that issue not even reach the people that most needed them. And so the most fervent Trump supporters, the people that are really deep into one of the poles of this picture, I don't know if I can see my cursor here, but these, the people that are that probably most needed those refutations were not even reached because the epistemic network, as I said earlier, works as a filter And so certain kind of media, for example, that more liberal media is not even gonna reach the support, the most avid and fervent Trump supporters. And so how can you convince somebody if you cannot even talk to them, really? And so polarization is a big issue. Again, another issue that is very easily illustrated by American politics is the issue of fake news. There's been a lot of talk of fake news in the media, and there is some work that has been done by social epistemologists on fake news. And the idea is that fake news are item of news that are meant to attract the attention, and often they are either meant to be deceptive or happen to be deceptive, and they're being circulated without any kind of interest in the truth or falsity of their content, but they're just circulated for to get clicks, essentially. So there's two possible really reasons why fake news exists. One is that there is two possible purposes, I guess, fake news is used for. One is to try to convince people of some view or other. This is, for example, there's a picture here from that is supposedly from one of Trump's rallies, in which he was trying to convince his supporters that that the election had been stolen, and that there were widespread irregularities in the last presidential election, the 2020 presidential election. And this is an example of what fake news looks like. Again, it's aided by the existence of epistemic bubbles, and aided by the fact that some people gave high credence to whatever President Trump said, but were not even reached by the opinions of people that disagreed with Trump. Now, if you spend a little bit of time looking at this picture, though, you're going to notice something interesting. So look at it a little bit and see what you see. So supposedly this is a picture in which there are two Trump supporters holding up signs. And now if you read actually what the signs say, you're actually going to notice that one of them is going to say "Stop the Steal," spelled S-T-E-E-L. And the other one says "Stop the Electric Collage." Now, actually, this picture happens to be a picture that was shared by one of my Facebook friends, who also happens to be a professor. So, smart guy. But this is also an instance of fake news. And it's a picture that was actually, if you actually look at it closely, you can sort of see how pixelated it is, which is a clear sign that the picture has been tampered with, and actually you can sort of see that it's been kind of overwritten. The signs have been overwritten, but even if you just think about the unlikely occurrence of not one, not two, but three different spellings happening on two signs so close to each other, already that should be like a reason to doubt that that's actually a real picture, just because that's such an unlikely occurrence. And yet people who think that Trump supporters are kind of yahoos, ignorant, and not very smart, are willing to actually think that this is actually a good picture. They're not going to think about it twice. They're not going to check their own prejudices here, and notice that there is something wrong with the picture. So one of the things I think that it's really important to understand with fake news is that we really are all extremely susceptible to it, even those of us who think that they're kind of above it. Unfortunately, because of the barrage of information and misinformation we come across over the internet, and especially because I think the way we use social media, because we use social media in a way a bit just like we use junk food. It's the kind of thing we do when we are tired, when we are kind of stressed, we are anxious. We use it to distract ourselves, to reward ourselves after a long day, and so on. And in that way, in that sense, we're kind of at our kind of attention and our ability to uh, discern the good news from the fake news is at its lowest, probably. And we're all kind of prone to accepting fake news, especially when it sits well with what we and our group of friends, our social network, and our epistemic network already believe. And that's one of the reasons why fake news sort of lives in this environment of polarization and epistemic bubbles. It's harder to kind of pierce the bubble, and so it's harder for people to actually if somebody who says, "Oh, there is something really wrong with that picture," we should think about it. Now, this should not make you think, though, that epistemic bubbles are necessarily always bad. So, as I said, epistemic bubbles can filter information, but can also filter misinformation. And because of our limited resources, that's actually not a bad thing at all. So, if I'm going to quickly mention later conspiracy theories, but it's a good example of something that we really would rather keep out of our epistemic bubble if we can. And so if our epistemic bubbles actually keeps out certain certain conspiracy theories, that would not be necessarily a bad thing. Like going back to flat earthers, if you have a friend who actually really believes in that Earth is a disk, they might try to start, poking holes in your arguments and your beliefs. And since most of us do not really get to the bottom of most of our beliefs, we just kind of accept them. That's what we've been told always, that Earth is a globe, and and we have never really questioned it. We might know the reasons, but not really sure. We kind of take it on trust. Sure, we might even have heard that there are experiments that actually show you that there is a globe. There are pictures that are allegedly taken from space that seem to show that the Earth is a globe, et cetera, et cetera. But your friend has kind of counter arguments for all of that, and then notices all these little discrepancies or weird occurrences that might make you start doubting your own beliefs. Now, you'd be wasting your time, really. Trust me, Earth is a globe. But if you sometimes, just the existence of doubt makes things harder for us. And so, in a way, epistemic bubbles could be a positive things if they're actually working to filter out false beliefs. Now, another more worrisome phenomenon that doesn't really have a positive aspect to it, and it's sometimes conflated with epistemic bubbles or filter bubbles, but that social epistemologists, especially thanks to a social epistemologist called Thi Nguyen, they have been working on, and they've been distinguishing, is that of ecochambers. Ecochambers start in a way, if you will, as an epistemic bubble, but what they have, unlike epistemic bubbles, is that they have more of a pyramidal structure, and that means that there is somebody in the echo chamber who has a clear sort of epistemic authority over the members of the echo chambers. And crucially, this person works, this person or these persons, or the institutions, if you will, they work by constantly undermining the epistemic credibility of outside sources. So it's not just that you are inside a bubble, but there is also somebody in the bubble that tells you, look, everybody else, they're just crazy. They're just wrong. The mainstream media is all like, a bunch of communists, or, the mainstream media is just a bunch of like, capitalist lovers and so on. And in that way kind of undermines the authority of anybody outside the echo chamber. The echo chamber is more dangerous because at least in the epistemic bubble, you can hope that if you're really starved from some piece of information, you might come across it. But if you're part of an echo chamber, even if you come across a piece of information that did not belong inside your echo chamber, the work that has been done to undermine the credibility and the trust that you have in those outside the echo chamber is going to probably make you dismiss it. This is the reason why echo chambers often give rise to conspiracy theories. There's been a lot of work on conspiracy theories lately, especially because of the relevance that they've had to mainstream politics in a way that probably did not really happen um, in at least I think from after the assassination of JFK probably. So it's been a few decades. While there were conspiracy theories, for example, about 9/11, they were very fringe phenomena. But the rise of Donald Trump has actually brought conspiracy theories like as the QAnon conspiracy theories. You have Q Shaman here pictured as one of the leaders of the QAnon conspiracy theories, at least on online or in person. I don't know. Um, and the problem is for social epistemologists is try to figure out exactly what is wrong with conspiracy theories, partly because conspiracy actually happened, and so not all theories that postulate the existence of a conspiracy are wrong. So sometimes we've had conspiracies, and it's important to uncover conspiracies when they exist. The problem is that sometimes this kind of conspiracy thinking, probably you could say conspiracy theorizing, can lead people down a very dangerous path. And again, the incidents in the United States surrounding the for example January 6th incidents in which some people lost their lives due to riots and the invasion of the Capitol that led to a few deaths, and that were fueled by conspiracy theories. They show you what kind of destructive power they can have. And so this is another topic that um, social epistemology has spent quite a bit of time talking about. Now, so far I'm mostly focused on this area, but I want to talk to you briefly before starting leaving you some time to ask some questions. This is actually the area in which I happen to work, which is a different area of social epistemology, but it's social epistemology is very connected actually. Um, so it has to do with experts, and again, going back to the division of epistemic labor, the idea is that some people specialize in certain fields, and we have seen firsthand really in the last few months how important expertise is in our society. Um, for example, we have been all under some sort of lockdown restrictions, mostly due to the advice of public health experts and epidemiologists. Um, and the problem is with experts is that we do not always know who and when to trust them. First of all, sometimes experts disagree with each other. Other times, experts tend to have kind of a kind of outlook on things that is not necessarily the one we have. Um, and most importantly, we do not seem to have ways to check on their kind of expertise. What we can do is to check their credentials. Did they get a PhD from somewhere? Was it a reputable institution, and so on? So it goes back to the issue of trust that I was mentioning earlier. Um, and but we are often unable to actually check whether these so-called experts, the people that can call themselves experts, are actually experts. And so some people end up listening to the wrong experts. Some people end up listening to all sort of crackpots. And most importantly, often we witness very big disagreements among seeming expert, and we have to figure out as non-experts, as was sometimes called novices, we have to figure out who we have to listen to. And as I said, the whole COVID pandemic really shows what an important role experts do play in public policy, in even kind of everyday decisions that we make. And social epistemologists have been thinking quite a bit about this. Finally, I just wanted to discuss one last um, topic, and as I say, this is kind of um, it's just a kind of a quick overview in which I decided to choose. I've chosen some topics that I think it was particularly interesting, but it's only really a small sample of all the things that social epistemology has to offer. But it's one interesting aspect of it has to do with what we call epistemic injustice. Is something that seen a lot of work done on it. One variety of testimonial injustice that is particularly important, of sort of epistemic injustice is particularly important, is what we call testimonial injustice. And that has to do with the excess credibility that is given to certain people in society in virtue of their social role rather than their actual epistemic credibility. And the epistemic deficit that some people suffer from. And so, for example, here we have a picture from a demonstration from about the Me Too movement that says "Believe women." Why do we need to say "Believe women"? Because women historically have been always considered kind of second-class knowers, not just second-class citizens, not just second-class persons, but second-class knowers as well. And often they've been considered irrational, too emotional, and they've been given all this kind of negative connotation. And so when, for example, women made accusations of sexual harassments or sexual assault, they were often not believed, simply in virtue of the fact of being women, and simply in virtue of the fact that the people they accused of harassment and assault often were powerful men who enjoyed an excess credibility. And so there was, as I was saying earlier, this question of epistemic deficit and epistemic surplus, credibility deficit and credibility surplus, and those two kind of perfectly kind of interplay in these kind of cases. And so the Me Too movement was kind of crucial in kind of trying to undermine this notion. But unfortunately, these are ideas that are very deeply ingrained in our society. And so one of the things social epistemologists are really thinking about is how to try to change these aspect of epistemic injustice. And so these kind of injustices that have a clear kind of epistemic dimension to them. Anyway, so this is, I guess, enough for our little tour. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you like to contact me by email, that's my email address. And if there are any questions, we could probably open the floor for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We actually do have a couple questions in the chat here. Some came through so everyone could see them, and there are some that I have on the back end here as well. So the first one is Ben is asking, what about Wikipedia? How trustworthy do you think this is? So like a crowdsourcing information platform.
Well, Wikipedia is a very interesting example. I tend to, don't tell any of my colleagues, but I think Wikipedia is actually more trustworthy. So I'm saying don't tell any of my colleagues because you shouldn't, as a piece of advice, do not quote Wikipedia in your assignments, okay? Now that you go to university, don't use Wikipedia. You've probably been told not to do that in school already. But actually, Wikipedia is actually much better than often people give it credit for. The problem with Wikipedia, though, it's a problem of anonymity or pseudonymity, right? In which you cannot really check the epistemic credentials of the people that are making the edits. And there have been particular cases in which there's been, a lot of back and forth about specific entries on Wikipedia where people there's kind of edit wars where some piece of information or misinformation is being edited in and out, and unfortunately you cannot ever be completely sure that the final product is completely credible, but I think on average is actually relatively credible, and that's an impressive feat. And if you think about it, it's an impressive feat of social epistemology, among other things. So I think it's an interesting case.
Yeah, and there's a bit of conversation here in the chat too, back and forth between some people attending about Wikipedia. So definitely an interesting topic. My next question here is from Shikar, and they are asking, how can people trust the brilliant scientific theories that haven't and can't be proved, but make sense according to the theorizer? For example, the Hawking radiation theory.
Well, I'm a good person to ask because I actually happen to be primarily a philosopher of science. So if you're interested in this stuff, I really encourage you to take a philosophy of science course. But it's the relationship between theories and evidence is a big topic, is a huge topic in philosophy of science, as you can imagine. But I guess that some of it has to do with the ability of theories, of good theories, to predict really surprising stuff. So this is one thing that philosophers of science really have focused on, is the ability of theories to make what we call novel predictions. So pretty much every theory can sort of explain things after the fact. This is really what conspiracy theories actually do, right? They get a bunch of data and then they construct a really complicated story that actually overfits the data. There is way too much explanation going on. Every little bit is explained. But actually, that's not this hallmark of a good theory. The hallmark of a good theory is that it tells you, look, if you go and look under that stone that nobody has looked under, you're going to find something like this, and give you a specific description of what you're going to find. And what happens to the most interesting speculative theories is that they make predictions like that. The classic example of these is, Einstein's general theory of relativity that predicted the existence of gravitational waves, which eventually were detected by building this really complicated machine that didn't exist when Einstein came up with a theory, right? So you couldn't just by accident have stumbled in it. It would be like a huge coincidence if these things that are being detected have nothing to do with the theory. And so that's kind of the idea. But again, little advertisement for philosophy of science. Take a philosophy of science course if you're interested in the question.
Awesome. And do you teach that, Gabriel?
Yeah, I do. I think right now we are offering it every other year. But it's a fun class, especially if any of you is taking science in the broadest sense, any science, social sciences or natural sciences. I always really recommend to take both history of science, if you can, and philosophy of science.
Okay, awesome. That's great. We have a question here from Boris, and forgive my pronunciation here of this word, but is anything epistemic? Well,
epistemically, I'm very good at saying that. That's part of my job.
Epistemically, is anything epistemically trustful in the world of social media where the content represented to us is specific to our liking?
Boris, this is such a good question. It's very hard. I think the growth of algorithms really plays a really important role in shaping our worldview now. If you think of how much of as much as I was saying, it's most of our information comes through this kind of social network that we have around, this epistemic network. It's also even more true that now these days that our social / epistemic network is more and more becoming our network on social medias. And because social medias are not kind of neutral mediums, they actually make choices in the background for us. I think it's at least questionable whether we should take things at face value when you're on social media, because the algorithms can do all sort of things. The primary purpose of social media is to get eyeballs glued to them, and so truth or reliability are not even a concern. What makes something good from the point of view of social media is that it's click worthy, it's view worthy, and this is the reason why, to be honest, social media company decided to ban Trump only once he was no longer useful, and when he was no longer such a big draw of presence on social media and traffic. And so again, we should be very careful. And unfortunately, we know very little about what's going on behind the surface, and these companies have all reason to hide it from us. But we have seen already that it can be very important repercussions on our democracy. For example, if you only think about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, whether or not it was actually effective, and there is some debate about that. Whether Cambridge Analytica was actually affecting and swaying voters. What is important is that there was an attempt to do that, and that by itself makes social media a very, very dangerous kind of environment for us epistemically.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more questions here for you. This one's from Luca. So when we have a given issue, does epistemology work on solutions to these problems, or at least a discourse or discussion on potential solutions?
Right. Yeah, ideally, that's what we would like to do. So philosophy is first and foremost a discipline in which we try to sort of ask questions and try to figure out. As you probably have seen, we like to draw distinctions, for example. We like to produce these concepts that are more and more kind of refined and better, because it helps us understand better the world. But there is also a lot, especially in social epistemology, there's been a lot of work on what we call ameliorative epistemologies, which means which ways do we have to make things better, right? How can we improve things? Because as we've seen, some of these, while as I said, the social dimension of our knowledge is very important, it also has some drawbacks. And so there has been a lot of work on all of these topics, from conspiracy theories to fake news to epistemic bubbles in the kind of negative sense. That has been done in suggesting how we could improve things. Whether we have found any answers yet, it's a big question, and it's certainly something that philosophers like me have to work with, social scientists, and others to actually figure out. It's not something that is definitely going to come only from social epistemology, but social epistemology definitely is something to offer.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. Like to work, like when you don't necessarily think about working with different specialties or through different departments on finding those solutions. So very interesting. And my last question here that I have in the chat is: have you seen the documentary Seaspiracy? And have you or no?
I haven't seen that one. I've seen a few of these documentaries. Seaspiracy, I don't think I've watched.
Okay, so maybe let's just talk about like documentaries in general. Do you think that the details in these documentaries are true and can be trusted, or are exaggerated?
Well, so I think this is something that's true of a lot of what we've discussed, is that the technology has really helped us sort of as democratized, I guess, content production. And so even people with a very small budget can produce a documentary that looks like a professional documentary. And because so much of our judgments about credibility are based on these kind of external markers, like production values, and you see a documentary that looks like a professionally made documentaries, you think, well, this is something that has been, people have put some money to produce. And when people put money behind a project, it means that they believe in that project. And so it sends what economists call a signal. And so the problem is that now, anybody who has like a little drone camera can produce like a really cool looking documentary. Anybody who has like a minimal technical skills can edit a documentary that looks really professional. So another example of a documentary like this, I didn't see Seaspiracy, but what I managed to watch is Plandemic. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, because it was taken off YouTube quite early on during the pandemic. And it was this documentary that really looked like a professionally made talk show in which one of the hosts was a person with a PhD in biology, biochemistry, so a credible, seemingly credible expert, and that peddled like most incredible conspiracy theories about the COVID virus that was actually created by the US military and was released onto the population on purpose to increase government power, essentially. But when you look at a documentary like that on YouTube, you might think, oh, look, somebody has put all that money into something like that. It might be true. Now, first of all, just because somebody puts a lot of money in something, that doesn't mean it's true. Something I didn't even get into, but you might want to have a look at. It's how much money was poured into climate change denialism by corporations such as ExxonMobil and the Koch brothers and so on. So there is for certain causes there is always deep pockets that are willing to fund them. But also these days, it doesn't take big pockets to actually produce something that looks credible. And unfortunately, because we use all these shortcuts to determine credibility of things because of our limited resources, we might end up believing something because it looks legitimate when it's just a mockery, really, of something legitimate.
Yeah, it's something to think about for sure, especially these days when we're consuming so much content, whether it be social media or documentaries. It's definitely something to kind of pause and think about. So yeah.
Right, I just as kind of as a word of advice, because I think we are all susceptible to that. As I was saying earlier, like I showed you that picture. That picture was shared by a friend of mine who has a PhD. He's a professor. You would expect him to be able to exert that level of critical scrutiny on something, and yet when something conforms to what we already believe, we are much less critical. And so one of the things is that we should try to sort of use our common sense actually and use our kind of critical thinking skills and not let our guard down, really.
Yeah, that's great advice. So thank you so much. This has been awesome. Thank you for everyone that's joined us tonight. Again, Gabriel's contact information is on the screen there. Hopefully you'll see some of these folks next year.
Right, that would be great.
Online or in person. That would be awesome. So definitely check out his classes if you have the chance. There's going to be more mini lectures all week. So if there's other topics that you're interested in, definitely check them out on our See You at Home website and continue to register for those on 360. But again, thank you so much for coming tonight, Gabriel. This was a real pleasure. It's so interesting to hear your expertise. So we really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And, thanks everybody for coming. And I hope you enjoyed it.
Awesome. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.